Hi, I'm Nicole Casartelli. I'm a security practitioner at Accenture, here to have a conversation about the impact of quantum computing on security. I'm here with Andrew Driscoll and Chris Hickman. Thank you so much for joining me today. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me, Nicole. I'm Andrew Driscoll. I lead Accenture's quantum security labs. Chris?
Chris Hickman, I'm the Chief Security Officer at Keyfactor. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation.
Thank you. To start us off, could you give us a broad introduction to the state of quantum cryptography and quantum computing and what the most pressing factors in the space are at the moment?
Andrew, why don't you lead us off on that?
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely do that. So, where we're at with quantum security right now, the main issue is NIST has put out the deprecation for one of the key algorithms that make sure that we are all secure, right? And that date is 2030. So ideally, you'd want to not be using that insecure algorithm by then and be moved over more towards a secure algorithm in the form of like post-quantum cryptography, right? And to help achieve this, there are many different steps that organizations need to take. I mean, I say many, but it really just boils down to three simple steps. Strategy, remediation, or strategy, discovery, remediation. Um, you know, but aside from getting to that, which we'll most likely dive in deeper, another issue is why are we even talking about this? And that is due to quantum computing. And quantum computing, really, in a nutshell, it just can break our modern day encryption. So, in other words, it could basically just make anything that you're sending over the internet easily visible to anyone. And this is more prevalent for people who like may have a malicious vendetta against you, or like a nation state attacking another nation state, or maybe someone wants to steal like some IP from a company, right? This applies to everyone and everything on the entire world because we all rely on this. We all rely on encryption to keep us safe.
I think the other dynamic to this, which is a little bit unique, is we've never had to do an entire swap out of cryptography inside of an organization before. So the level of effort for an organization to go through that and the timeline associated with it is not lending itself to meeting the guidance that's been put out, the 2030 date that you mentioned, particularly. So it's a massive task for an organization to undertake with a lot of complexity, with risk. Hence the reason why strategy is so important. But it is not one that you sort of unplug one thing and just plug another thing in. There's multiple different strategies, and all of them need to be taken into account to keep an organization safe.
Agreed.
Can you put into perspective what the scale of this shift is going to look like?
So it's kind of like asking how long a piece of string is. You'll never get the same answer twice. It can be depending on what the objectives of the organization are. Obviously security is the primary objective, but highest risk data is the immediate concern for most organizations. So while we still don't have that quantum computer that can break RSA and ECC, the two protocols, algorithms that are most impacted, the reality is that we also know that data is being stolen now through harvest now or steal now and decrypt later, and organizations need to take that into account as a part of their planning to mitigate the risk against that. So the first step is figure out what you've got and what data it's protecting, and then you can come up with the plan that makes sense to your organization. But no two organizations are going to have exactly the same plan or the same outcome, which is why it's really important to understand what the problem space is and what the impact is so that you can come up with the right plan for your organization.
Yeah, and I just add on a little bit. So I know, Chris, you mentioned the high risk data, and so the data that you ideally want to start looking at is the data that's supposed to be kept secure for like 5, 10 years, because as I brought up earlier, NIST says, hey, you need to switch over from this algorithm like RSA, ECC, which is what we use every day nowadays. You need to change that over to the new quantum safe algorithms, right? And by 2030. And so basically, any data that you need to be keep safe for 5 or more years is what you want to ideally prioritize. Looking at where the cryptography's at, and then figuring out strategies and coming up with strategies to remediate that and make sure that that information is now kept safe from those steal now, harvest now, decrypt later attacks.
Mhm.
And in terms of the obviously a timeline is difficult to place, but is this push towards quantum security more data and you mentioned currently dealing with steal now, decrypt later. Is the prioritizing a push towards quantum cryptography, is that driven more by real quantum breakthroughs or broader ecosystem maturity and standardization processes?
I would say it's probably a little bit of both.
Hmm.
However, the reality is that organizations aren't going to go through this type of a wholesale change
Hmm.
unless there is a risk present.
Hmm.
We've had RSA in particular since the late 70s, early 80s type of approach, on scale and on mass, and it's been very suitable for its function over the period of time. The difference is that with the quantum threat, our traditional approach has always been just make the keys bigger, right? Just make it
Yeah.
bigger, make it bigger, make the math harder. This is the first time we've had to consider that a quantum computer can do a different type of math, so we need a different type of algorithm in order to protect against that. So I think the things that are now driving the conversation is in last year, I think it was August.
Hmm.
NIST announced the three stateless candidates that we have now. So we have standardization, which is great. That makes cross compatibility and things like that a little bit more easier for organizations. Then in November was the announcement of the deprecation timelines, and so organizations are really taking this threat seriously. But the question often comes up too, and I'm sure you get asked it as well, Andrew. Right? When is that quantum computer going to be? And
Yep.
the answer I always come up with, because we just don't know,
Hmm.
is yesterday. We have to assume it was yesterday. And that is a huge part of understanding where we're at. The most likely candidates to come up with that computer are going to be people who are probably not in the habit of advertising their work, nation states and things of the sort. So, there are some guidance that sort of says, hey, 2029 to 2034, 35, in that timeline. But, it's going to take an average organization somewhere in the neighborhood of up to 10 to 15 years to do the entire shift over.
Hmm.
It's timing wise, and the reason to move is because you have to assume that your data is going to be at risk before you've completed your migration. Standards just help make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Actually, I had two things I wanted to comment on. Add a little additional details. So we have the standards that are out. NIST with the deprecation date of last year is out. And right now, the main next step is for compliance and regulatory bodies to actually set the requirements saying, hey, you need to use these new algorithms that NIST has standardized, or more broadly, be like, hey, you need to use algorithms to ensure your consumers' data is kept safe, right? So the standard, or now the compliance aspect needs to catch up with those standards, and we're slowly seeing those come out. Like,
We definitely are starting to see a little bit of more of a trend in that
yeah,
respect, especially in certain industries. Definitely in government, there's been some guidelines and executive orders. Starting definitely to see it in finance as well.
yep,
Starting to see trends in healthcare starting to pick up. Various industries are getting aligned, and it's not just a North American effort. I mean, it's a global movement. This is not just a U.S. based problem or a
hmm,
European based problem. So every jurisdiction, Canada, the U.S., EU, Asia Pac, Australia, have all come out with their own recommended guidance and timelines for both government organizations and commercial enterprises. It's definitely at a point now where people are starting to look at the execution of, not just the theory behind, getting ready for this event.
You mentioned vendors and governmental bodies beginning to respond, implement plans, as well as the beginnings of regulations and figuring out standards. How are vendors realistically responding to post-quantum cryptography? Are we beginning to see realistic implementation or more planning or even just marketing?
Yeah,
Could I say
go ahead,
one
please.
additional thing
Please.
before that? So I know on one of the other points you were saying, so like quantum computers, when are they coming out? Like 29, 2035, something like that. But Chris is like saying, hey, we need to treat it as if it's like coming out tomorrow. Because if you think about it from like a strategic perspective, if an adversary were to have a quantum computer, right? Would they be like, hey guys, we got a quantum computer, change your cryptography?
Yeah,
No, they would want to keep that a secret so they can get that information and, take advantage of that like technological powers or technological superiority as long as possible, right? And so what we'll probably end up hearing from the quantum computers coming out that are strong enough are from the research institutions, right?
absolutely.
IBM, Microsoft, Google, and such, right? So we'll hear that from them, but we most likely won't hear them from nation states, right? And those will be like the ones that are more specifically to keep it on the DL, right? Keep it like super duper top secret. So I just wanted to add that in there for like a little additional perspective on why
Yeah,
Chris was saying, hey, treat it like it came out yesterday, or treat
Mhm.
it like it will come out tomorrow.
absolutely, absolutely. So, swinging back to your question about vendors, certainly, as a vendor ourselves,
Mhm.
we started to look at the just take a step back. The post quantum algorithms, NIST started really working on them in 2016. So they've been sort of floating around and going through academic circles, and the move towards standardization took quite a while, but it took a while for a purpose, and the purpose was to get it right. The first initial candidates that came out were available to vendors, prior to standardization to play with and to get familiar with and to start looking at, how to implement them in products and things of the sort. Since they've been standardized now, we're definitely seeing an uptick of vendors starting to adopt those protocols and to also do interoperability testing. But cryptography is a codependent ecosystem. It's not a single point, so it requires a lot of change, not just a single thing. Like in PKI, it's not just a certificate. You require your TLS to be able to interpret that. You
Hmm.
require your applications to understand it, your operating systems, so on and so forth. So there's still a bit to go, and then there is also a backlog in some of the testing areas, FIPS testing and things of the sort, which is contributing to getting the certifications done for a
Mhm.
lot of vendors.
Yeah,
Uh, you know,
I've read about that too.
and so it, the mass is there. The solutions are in market today.
Mhm.
The ones that I'm familiar with are all tested and ready to go. But it's going to sort of take another year or two to get that full end-to-end connectivity. But having said that, I don't want to put across. There's two things that I worry about, right, as it relates to this. First of all, this is not a vendor problem.
Mhm.
Don't wait for a vendor to implement a solution because there are so many moving parts and there's no single vendor in any organization. It's a multi-vendor ecosystem.
Yeah.
Don't wait. This is not a Windows upgrade. It's an entire,
If only it was that easy.
if
You know
only it
what I
was that
mean?
easy.
If only it was that easy.
I totally agree. So I say that, and the second thing is, organizations need to start planning now because these new set of algorithms
Mhm.
aren't the same as the old algorithms. This is
Mhm.
not sort of a
Hmm.
migration from A to B and it's transparent. Key sizes are different. The impact, the latency, processing power required, certain things are going to break and not be able to accommodate these keys. You need to know what those things are now so that you have a plan to make those changes inside of the organization. So the planning and the strategy part is really important, and it starts a lot of it with just the education
Mhm.
of how is this different.
Yeah.
And to that point, how can organizations begin to try to be proactive about implementing these changes and preparing rather than reactive?
Well, to be honest with you,
Mhm.
if you're watching this or listening to this session, that's a
Mhm.
great start, right? It starts a lot with education, just becoming familiar. We at Keyfactor have our PQC labs, which anybody can go to and sign up and get certificates and play with them and figure out, are they bigger than a bread box type of approach, and what do they look like? And so there's a lot of activity in market to educate. From various vendors and the GSIs and the Accentures of the world and people like that. But at the end of the day, it has to come down to helping your business understand why this is a priority and why action needs to take place, and the risk that is putting the organization at that, because it tends to start at a more technical level,
Mhm.
but it is in fact a business problem.
Of course. Yeah, and like this is really applicable to the companies that have a lot of physical infrastructure too, right?
Yep.
Because like a lot of their devices, being a little technical here, the new algorithms that came out, they require a lot more storage. So like like your phone like maybe has 128 gigabytes, right? Let's say like one algorithm, like the RSA algorithm is 128, right? But like the post quantum may require 256, right? Your phone wouldn't be able to support it. And there's a lot of like more of like these legacy like infrastructure type pieces that it's kind of like they put them there with just the right amount of storage for like the old algorithms, the classical algorithms like RSA and such. But now they're going to have to revisit those implementations because they won't be able to support the new algorithms, and that'll put them at vulnerability, right? And there's another point that you're kind of like leading towards, and I wanted to bring that up. I know you're saying like a lot of vendors are working on implementing them. One thing that we're seeing from like an Accenture POV, and let me know if you're seeing this. I imagine you are, is a lot of different nations. They aren't just using the NIST standards. Like they may use it as a baseline, but they're coming out with their own like slightly modified version of cryptography, right, or
Yeah,
cryptographic libraries.
yeah.
And so I know you're talking about like interoperability. Another issue is like interoperability between like products, but more holistically, an issue that's going to come up is like libraries, right? Will our library be able to talk to another one? Will our nation be able to talk to like South Korea? Because like I know South Korea is coming out with their own like library, right? So like that's another big
Absolutely.
issue.
Where data sovereignty tends to exist, algorithmic sovereignty, invent a new term perhaps on the
It's
fly.
it's coming up,
It is also, we're absolutely seeing that, and countries are either 100% okay with whatever is commercially available, but there's an equal number that are sort of saying, you know what, if you're going to operate in this geography, you can adopt the standards, but you need to use this cryptographic library or this implementation of that standard
Yep.
and when data is passing through countries in large organizations, that becomes a concern, because if you look at places like France and Germany, for instance, they do have rules about data in transit through their geography.
Mhm.
So do you decrypt at the edge and re-encrypt? There's a number of different things that come up, and that's
Mhm.
to your point, Andrew, and why strategy becomes so important is to get a handle on all of those nuance type of things,
Hmm.
and have the runway to be able to address them and solve them.
Yeah.
And to that point, how can organizations approach if protocols don't integrate well together? How fragile currently is that system and that interconnected network?
It's not a problem that people have really thought of yet, I feel, because
Mhm.
like the reason why I say that is because we've all just relied on using the same two algorithms basically, like with different variations slightly. But like RSA ECC, right? They basically just relied on those two, and it'll just work across the world.
Yep.
And so this is like a new problem that is coming up that people are working on towards dealing with.
Yeah, I know a good example for some of the things at Keyfactor, right, is PKI is very dependent, for instance, on an HSM,
Very
right, a
much.
hardware security module.
Hmm.
So we've been spending a lot of time and attention
Do you want to
on.
describe what an HSM is real
It's
quick?
it's
The
a yeah,
values.
it's a hardware security module. It's basically a hardware appliance. More often than not, a physical piece of hardware or something that is in the cloud that terminates in a physical piece of hardware that is a secure storage mechanism for keys. So in PKI, for
Yeah, so it's like a
instance,
safe, right?
it's like a safe,
Yeah, yeah.
or sort of some kind of a vault type of approach.
Mhm. Awesome.
But in PKI, those are used to store the sensitive keys for the certificate authorities and things like that. But that interoperability has to be there. What we're so we spend a lot of time testing to make sure that our ecosystem works. Downstream, we're parts of organizations that are doing a lot of interoperability testing. Early days, but still it's happening, which is great. I think there is a general desire, understanding the scope of the problem within the greater community, to all work together. And I've actually seen a lot of spots where organizations that traditionally would compete fiercely are actually cooperating fiercely, because the timelines are so tight and so short. So having said all of that, is it going to be 100% perfect all of the time? Probably not, and we've seen a little bit of that as well. So there are still some there's still some maturity that needs to come to the space. There's still some optimization that needs to come to the space, but the early trends show that we are moving in the right direction today.
Are there any particular initiatives or organizing bodies that you would point vendors or organizations to exploring as a way of collaborating with other groups?
There's quite a number that I've come across, and I know,
Yeah.
obviously you should be following things that NIST are doing, and the sort of standards bodies, and if you happen to be in one of the geographies that's looking at the sort of cryptographic sovereignty piece, or algorithmic sovereignty, always important to follow those. The traditional standards bodies like the IETFs of the world and the ISOs and organizations like that. There's also a lot of industry bodies. If you're in the payment system, for instance, there's things that track on post-quantum in payment systems, IoT, another one, so on and so forth. But the world that I live in PKI, for instance, probably one of the most influential organizations today is the PKI Consortium, as an example, where we're actually doing a lot of interoperability testing, where we're working on large-scale problems, and it's 100% community-based and community contributed, meaning there's no membership fees and everything's available online for free. And that is one of the places where, because asymmetric cryptography is so much or so prevalently at risks, that there's a lot of cooperation going on, a lot of community sharing of ideas and learnings.
Yeah, and I would say another one as well is your industry ISAC. So like ISAC being ISAC. So like FS ISAC, and those types for your industry. They also have a lot of prevalent information, and they're starting to include more information on post quantum. WEF is also talking about post quantum as well. So is the UN. I think the UN said this year is the year of quantum.
It
Correct
is
me
the
if I'm
year of
wrong.
quantum.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there are a lot of big bodies that also agree that this is happening, and are starting to provide guidance.
And WEF being the World Economic Forum, I assume?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir, and UN, United Nations. So
Can you expand on it being the year of quantum? What have been the priorities laid out by that initiative?
It's if we think of security being really a fundamental element of society now, especially IT security. It's having an organization like the United Nations bring attention to the advancements in quantum, and to be very fair, quantum computing has a ton of upside as well. It's not all doom and gloom. Unfortunately, one of the results of these great computers that can do great things is it can break existing cryptography. And so it's sort of a side effect, but by bringing the focus and the spotlight to the quantum space, it brings it from the realm of science fiction and people thinking, oh, that's tomorrow's problem, into focus of, hey, quantum computers actually exist. They actually are doing great things today. People are using them to break algorithms today, just not at the scale that they're commercially being used today. So, there are advancements coming in that respect, but it brings attention to the space, which brings acknowledgement of the potential side effect of quantum computers continuing to grow and scale.
Yeah, there's always pros and cons to each new technological advancement, like you're saying. So it's just you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah,
Take the good with
exactly.
the bad these days.
The good news is we have an anecdote or an antidote to this. This quantum computer.
Yeah.
It can be solved.
We got one ahead of time,
Yeah,
right? So it's not
exactly.
just like popping up out of the blue. So we can start taking steps to fixing and helping you be a bit safer against it.